Okay, so we have our program here. Let's go ahead and run it. Enter the number of miles driven, 345. The number of gallons used, 16.5. And your car gets 20.9 miles to the gallon. Okay, so we're ready to take our input and make functions that will return the input values. Okay, so I have these variables up here, and I'm going to print a welcome message. And instead of prompting the user to enter the number of miles right here, I'm going to create an input function. So I'm going to call that function get miles. And then down here I'm going to define it. Remember, don't indent the def. And then get miles. And I have to put the colon at the end. And then I'll create a local variable miles. And I will set miles to whatever the user enters. And then this is the most important part. I'm going to return miles. Because the miles down here is a different local variable. This is a local variable, miles, that is used in this function. This miles up here is the variable that's in main. These are two different miles variables. So I'm going to walk through this program and hand trace kind of what's going on. Actually, I'll just do a diagram. So up here, this creates a variable. This creates a variable called miles. And we're just going to put 0 in it, right? And then we get the gallons and the miles per gallon. And then I'm going to print a welcome message. And when this statement executes, this is a function call. It's the name of the function in 2 parentheses. And so it will go down to where the function is defined, and it will execute all of these lines of code. So this makes a different variable called miles. And then this miles is different than this miles. They're two different memory locations. This function does not know about the miles in main, and main does not know about the miles in the get miles function. Okay, they're like hidden to each other. So I'm going to ask the user how many miles they drove, and let's say they enter 345. Do you see how miles has 345, but the miles up here does not have anything in it, just the 0, right? So how do I get the 345 from this function back up into main? Because I'm going to need it, right, when I do the calculation. I'm going to need to have that value in there. And so that's where the return comes in. Return says take the value that's stored in this variable and return it back. So it's going to take it back up here, and it's going to store it in this variable miles. And so then the miles up here will have 345. And in actuality, after this function's done executing, this miles will go away. And then every time I call this function, a new miles will be created with a 0 in it. Okay, so that's how the return works in a function. So now let's go ahead and do the one for gallons. So I'll cut that out, and I'm going to make a function get gallons. And so then I have to define that down here. Def get gallons. And I'll make a variable gallons, set it to 0, and then I'll set gallons to whatever they enter, and then I'm going to return gallons. Okay, so again, if I were to trace through this with a diagram, when I create a variable gallons, initially it will have a 0 in it, And then when I get down to this line of code, get gallons is executed. So the flow of the program goes down here. It creates its own variable called gallons. And it stores a 0 in it. And then it'll ask the user how many gallons did they use. And if I put 16.4, again, this variable gallons has 16.4, but this one has nothing in it. So how do I get the 16.4 up back to main's variable? I have to return it. So when I say return, it takes the 16.4 and it copies it into this variable up here. So now gallons gets 16.4 and this gallons goes away.